All right, so the next question which we have is, what are the differences between theft and extortion? This was a question for KSLU June-July 2017 question paper for B.A.LL.B course, and this question was for 16 marks. Now, I will tell you how you can frame an answer for this question. But first thing is that you need to be very careful with regard to what is the question that they are asking, right? Sometimes they may ask you, define theft as per the provisions mentioned under IPC, and then differentiate between theft and extortion. All right. So in that case, you will have to define the word theft. All right. Then maybe in one sentence, you can write what is theft, what is extortion, but theft you need to explain in detail as compared to extortion, and then you can proceed with the differences. All right, but here they are simply asking you to differentiate between theft and extortion, but question is for 16 marks, right? So we cannot straight away jump into the differences, but rather we can start with a basic intro, then you can mention what is theft and extortion, then the differences, and finally you can conclude your answer with a conclusion. All right, so this is going to be the structure for our question. I'll just quickly tell you on how or what should you write in each of these headings. So you can start with a basic intro. Offenses, right? These two offenses, theft and extortion, both of these are relating to which chapter of IPC? That thing you should be very careful. All right. So under IPC, we have some 23 chapters, if I'm not wrong. So you need not read each and every chapter, but whatever is there inside your syllabus, right? You can prepare a list of all those chapters, that these are the chapters that are there in your syllabus, and these are the topics covered under it. All right, so whenever there's a question, it may be theft, it may be murder, it may be cruelty, whatever the question is, all right, you can always write that this particular type of offenses mentioned under this chapter of IPC. All right, so that would give strength to your question, and this is a basic thing which you can fit in anywhere in the answers. All right, so for this particular question, it's chapter 17 of IPC. Okay, so you can write an intro that the offenses of theft and extortion come under chapter 17 of IPC under offenses against property. So chapter 17 is relating to offenses against property, right? Some kind of crimes which are committed against property. Property has been one of the most essential constituents of human life. In your intro, you can write that property is very important for our survival. The right to protect this invaluable entitlement of humans leads to making of such laws. Because property is so important, and because we want to protect it against any sort of crimes or offenses, it has contributed in development of laws that protect us or that give us a remedy with regard to offenses against property. Property can be divided basically into two types, movable as well as immovable property. Right? Movable as in something which you can move, right? Like a pen, a laptop, that's a movable property. Immovable as in something which you cannot move, maybe land, a building. All right, so property can be of two types, movable and immovable. Any offense which is committed in regard to any property, whether it's movable or immovable, is punishable under provisions of law of crime or IPC. That means IPC under chapter 17, under the heading offenses against property, right? Property includes both movable and immovable property, and accordingly for all those different types of crimes, punishments are also mentioned under IPC. Same happens with regard to theft and extortion also. Those offenses and the punishments relating to them are explained in chapter 17 from sections 378 to 460. So these are the sections which we have under chapter 17 of IPC, and it mentions different types of crimes or offenses that may be committed against property, as well as the punishment for those crimes or offenses. All right, so this much you can write in your intro, basically telling about the sections relating to offenses against property as well as the chapter, right? Broadly, you are giving an intro with regard to offenses against property. Once you are done with the intro, you can narrow down your answer to the topic that they are asking. Right? There are many different types of offenses against property. They are not asking you about all those different types of offenses, but specifically with regard to theft and extortion only. So we can come to that point, theft and extortion. Offenses against property cover those offenses in which a person is deprived of his valuables illegally. Section 378 to Section 382 of IPC deals with theft, and Sections 383 to 389 deals with extortion. So here we are mentioning the specific sections. This was in general, right? This was in general with regard to offenses against property, but here we are specifically mentioning the sections with regard to theft and sections with regard to extortion. So it's well and good if you can write the sections. If not, also it's fine. You can simply remember this and you can mention that these are the sections talking about offenses against property, and somewhere in between it mentions about theft and extortion also. All right. If you do not cannot remember the exact sections, that's completely fine. You need not worry about it. So here you can either mention that these are the sections, or you can even mention specific sections that 378 provides for definition of theft, 379 provides for punishment, like that also you can mention. Or you may even define what is theft, right? Like a simple definition, what is theft, what is extortion from this part, right? What theft is, what extortion is, this thing you can write here also. But I thought it would be like a repetition, that's why I have not written it here. I just mentioned the sections and that's about it, right? So then you can mention both the offenses are different from one another. Okay, so what are the differences? You can either write it point wise, like point number one, this is theft, this is extortion, this is how they differ, or you can make like a table like this. Okay, it makes it look more organized or presentable if you write like this. So whatever way you are comfortable with, you can accordingly write in that way only in your exam. All right, so coming to the differences, right? Here we are mentioning points of difference. That means on what grounds theft and extortion is different, right? Here I'm mentioning the grounds, and here I'm mentioning how they differ from one another. First one is with regard to sections. So for theft, we have provisions under section 378 to 382. But for extortion, we have provisions under section 383 to 389. Second one is definition. Obviously, both of these are two different crimes or two different offenses. So the definition also would vary, right? So what is theft? When someone moves. Now, this is something that I have simplified from the provision of the Bear Act. All right. If you read the Bear Act, it might look a little complicated for someone. So I have tried to simplify it. Okay. If you find the Bear Act language comfortable, you can pick that also. You can put that also in this point. When someone moves a movable property, that means theft is applicable only with regard to movable property. All right. When someone moves a movable property out of possession of the possessor, oh, I'm not talking about owner, right? But if even if I'm not an owner, I'm having lawful possession of a property, I can also file a case against another person for theft, right? So here we are not concerned with whether the person is owner or not. We are just concerned that he was having possession of a property. When someone moves a movable property out of possession of the possessor with a dishonest intention, all right, with a dishonest intention, with a guilty mind, I'm moving a property out of possession of a person who was holding it. Why? Of taking possession of such property. I have a guilty intention to take possession of that property, and with that intention, I have moved this movable property out of possession of this person who was holding it, right? But how I'm doing it? Without, right? Without that person's consent, without asking the person, without taking his approval, or silently I have moved it. It is considered to be theft. So what is theft? When I am taking someone's movable property out of that person's possession with a dishonest intention, right? Of taking possession of some property, that will be theft. Like I can give you one example also to make it easy. Take for example, A cuts down a tree on Jet's ground, right? Maybe you are having a tree at your ground, right? Maybe a mango tree you are having. What I am doing is I am cutting down that tree with an intention of dishonestly taking possession of that property. Right? I want to take that possession of that particular tree and I am taking it without your consent. So that will be theft. If you have a laptop without your permission, without your approval, I'm carrying the laptop to my home with an intention that I'll keep it with myself, that also will be theft, right? You are owner or you are having possession of a movable property without your permission, without your consent. I am moving it out of your possession. That is theft. Now, what is extortion? When someone intentionally puts another person in fear of injury to him or to other person to induce delivery of any property or valuable thing, it is called as the offense of extortion. Here, again with an intention, I am putting someone in fear of an injury, right? That I will kill you if you do not do this, or I will kill your son, right? That means I am putting that person in fear of injury, or someone else also I may put. All right. And I am thereby inducing that person that the person delivers that property or some valuable security to me. Like in movies and all we see, right? People would come to rob a bank and they would say, I will, like, shoot this customer if you do not hand over all the things that you have, right? So those are what someone we are putting in fear that I am going to cause loss to this person, I'm going to cause harm to this person, right? So that would come under here. If I say that if you do not hand over possession of your laptop, I'm going to kidnap your son tomorrow, that will be extortion. All right, so that is the second point of difference based on definition, that in theft you are taking away possession of a movable property out of possession of the person who is holding it with a dishonest intention of taking possession of such property. In extortion, intentionally I am putting another person in fear of injury so that the person hands over the property or some valuable security or thing. What is valuable thing or valuable security? Maybe I am asking a person to sign on a blank piece of paper. All right, so blank piece of paper is not a property, but I can convert it into a valuable thing, right? So what I can do is later on I can write whatever I want because there is signature of the person. So that also would come under valuable thing. All right. So these are the first and second points of difference that we have. Now, the third point of difference is based on consent. In theft, what happens is the offender's intention is to take the property without owner's consent, right? Whoever is holding the property, I do not have that person's consent. I do not have that person's approval, but without that person knowing or giving consent, I am taking possession of the property. But what happens in extortion? In extortion, consent is obtained, right? Consent is present in extortion. Consent is not present in theft. In extortion, it is present by putting the person in possession of the property in fear of injury to himself to another person. That means I have obtained consent of the person either by putting that person in fear that I'm going to cause loss to you, cause some harm to you, or maybe to someone else. All right. So, third point of difference is that in case of theft, we do not have consent present. It is without consent of the person having possession of the property. But in case of extortion, we have consent of the person, right? But how consent is obtained? It is by putting that person or someone else in fear of an injury, right? So the way consent is obtained, that's not lawful, right? And that is the reason why it becomes a crime. Now, fourth point of difference is force. In theft, element of force is not present, right? I'm silently taking a property out of your possession. Maybe you are not even having its knowledge. So there is no element of force in case of theft. But there is an element of force in case of extortion, as property is obtained by putting a person in fear of injury to that person or to someone else, right? I will forcefully obtain consent of the person, or I will forcefully compel the possessor that you hand over this particular property to me, right? So that is what the next point of difference is, that in theft we do not have the element of force, but in case of extortion we have the element of force present. Next is type of property, right? What kind of property is it that is included? Type of property. Theft covers only the cases of movable property, right? Only movable property theft can be done. Extortion is wider in scope and it will cover any kind of property, valuable security, or anything that may be converted into a valuable security, right? Maybe you are owner of a plot of land and I am compelling you to sign on a piece of paper that you are gifting that plot of land to me, right? So that also would come under extortion. So plot of land is not movable, right? It's immovable property, but still it would be included. Why? Because by way of some valuable security, some papers, documents, I am trying to transfer the property in my name, right? So types of property, theft is very restricted, only with regard to movable property it's applicable, but in case of extortion, it is having wider scope. All right, so that's the another point of difference. Next is how property is obtained. How do you obtain the property? That also is a point of difference. In theft, there is dishonest removal of property. Dishonestly, silently, without your permission, without your consent, I am removing the property from your possession. But in extortion, property is delivered, right? I'm not taking it, you will deliver it. If I want to obtain possession of your laptop, I will say you hand over your laptop to me. Otherwise, I am going to kidnap your son tomorrow. That means what? Here you are only delivering the property, but here silently I am taking the property. Right? So, how property is obtained, that's also another point of difference between these two different types of crimes. Next one is moving of property. In theft, property must be moved by a person in order to such taking. Right? Property must move by a person, must be moved by a person. I will move the property. Why? So that I can take possession of it. But in extortion, threat may be by one person and the property may be received by another person. All right, I may say that I will kidnap your son tomorrow if you do not hand over your property to my manager. All right, here what happens? I am putting you in fear of injury, but you are not delivering the property to me, but rather I'm asking you to deliver the property to my manager. All right. So moving of property, that again may be a difference between these 2 points. And lastly, you can give one illustration because, or a case law maybe you can give for both the two things. Like case law is not a point of difference, neither an illustration is, but still you can put an illustration to increase the number of differences that you have mentioned. All right. So you can give one illustration that if someone cuts a tree which is there on someone else's ground, with a dishonest intention that I will take this possession of this tree without the person's consent. So that will become make it a theft. But in case of extortion, if someone says that I will kidnap your son if you do not hand over your laptop, and the person accordingly hands over possession of the laptop, it will become extortion. All right. So, what are the points of difference that we have? Sections that deal with these two different types of crimes. Definition. Here you can either write the direct definition, or you can just frame it in your own words, or just you can simply write whatever I have mentioned. Next is consent. In theft, no consent. In extortion, there is consent. Force. In theft, there is no force. In extortion, there is force. Types of property. Theft is very limited, applicable only with regard to movable property. But extortion is having wider scope. How property is obtained? Here, dishonestly, I will remove the property from your possession, but here I will compel you to deliver the property to me. Moving of the property. Here, property must be moved by the person so that I can take it. I will move it so that I can take it. Here, threat may be by one person and property may go to another person. And then simply two illustrations. All right. So these are the basic points of difference between theft and extortion. And then you can put a conclusion to end your answer. Here again, you can mention that property is considered to be an extension of the personality of an individual, right? Being member of a society, we have this tendency of holding property, right? We have a desire of holding property. Thus, Indian Penal Code provides for detailed provisions and punishments to cover different types of offenses that may be committed against property. Because everyone wants to hold possession of property, it is quite obvious that there is going to be different types of crimes that may be committed against property. That is the reason why IPC is providing for detailed provisions, right? As well as punishments with regard to different types of offenses that may be committed against a property. All those different offenses differ from one another based on the way the offense is being committed, right? Based on the way the offense is committed. Maybe you are silently taking possession of my property, or maybe you are compelling me to deliver the property. It may differ based on kinds of property. It may be exclusively movable property, or it may be any sort of property, or it may differ based on the amount of severity that is involved, right? Silently, if I'm taking the property, that will not be that much scary. But if someone comes with a knife and says, hand over the property or otherwise I'm going to kill you, that is going to be more scary. Or if five persons come with knives and then they just put you under a threat, that is going to be even more scary, right? So based on the amount of severity also, it will differ. So it's very important to know the basic point of difference between all these different types of offenses. We know IPC is mentioning different types of offenses that may be committed against property. But now, why do we need so many different classifications against property, right? Offenses against property. So that is the reason why it becomes very important that we understand the basic points of difference between these types of offenses. Only then we will be able to understand the purpose behind having all these different crimes that we have. All right, so that's about this question. What are the differences between theft and extortion? I hope this question is like this answer is clear to you. I will try to include more questions and answers with regard to IPC as well as Indian Contract Act. So that's all for today. Bye.